Doamnelor și domnilor, bună ziua și bine v-am găsit la ora Expertizei. Astăzi suntem în ospeție la delegația Uniunii Europene în Republica Moldova, iar invitatul meu special este șeful delegației UE în țara noastră, domnul Pirca Tapiola. Bună ziua, domnule ambasador. Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Your Excellency, the majority of Moldovan citizens who voted for the country's pro-European course are disappointed by the parties claiming to be pro-European, all because they formed a minority government being supported by an anti-Western party who said during the elections that they want to revise the association agreement. In your opinion, citizens' disappointment, is it rightful? And what will the EU do to ensure Moldovan citizens about European course continuity that they voted for?
Well, first of all, I am a bit allergic to this division, pro-European, anti-Western, and so on. I mean, there was one party which campaigned on a strong sort of anti-EU platform or wanting to denounce the association agreement, and that was, of course, their right also in terms of political campaigning. The Communist Party spoke, as you mentioned, about some revisions to the association agreement, but did not question the association agreement as such, nor the course towards Europe. Now, I don't necessarily see that the agreement would need revision, and I don't foresee there to be any major revisions. But as such, I don't see that this party would necessarily be very fundamentally anti-Western. So I would not want to put that polarization there. Where I think the citizens' disappointment comes more clearly in was a perceived lack of transparency within the process, from a bit of a lack of trust, which was also seen in a rather polarizing electoral result. Now, there's a new government, and the EU's position is very clear, has been very clearly one of openness to working with a government of the Republic of Moldova. Prime Minister Gaburic visited Brussels last week. I had the pleasure of being together with him there. The commitments to a continued course of reform, of modernization, of coming closer to the European Union, of implementing the association agreement, these have been voiced very strongly. They are there. But of course, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and we are willing to give support to the government of the Republic of Moldova in implementing the association agreement, in fighting corruption, in dealing with the reform of the judiciary. And I think that the depth of our relationship and where we're going will be judged by concrete actions.
Well, sir, what is Moldova risking then if the implementation of the association agreement will stagnate or democratic reforms will not be implemented?
I think that what Moldova is first and foremost risking are problems for herself. Because when we talk about Moldova's European course is all about standards of living, standards of justice, standards of how society functions inside Moldova. It's about economic benefit for the Republic of Moldova and economic benefit for the population. I think I've said this quite a few times in different fora, that, for instance, let's look at the fight against corruption and the judiciary. We have opened the EU market. It's the richest market in the world. It's perhaps the most attractive market in the world. And using that market provides almost limitless possibilities of economic growth, new jobs, new possibilities for the Republic of Moldova. Now, if issues linked to corruption, the judiciary, are not addressed, so it will be very difficult for new investors to take an investment decision and say, here we have the Republic of Moldova, this would be a good base for us to work, to benefit from the EU market, to benefit from a level playing field based on those EU standards which are commitments in the association agreement, and the economic benefit of the agreement just simply would not be there. So you will need that investment. You will need to look at the quality standards, others which are there. They will give the possibility to new export possibilities. You need to have a level playing field in also the services sector, including the insurance sector, which has been one which has been discussed a lot, in order again to get new investment, new jobs, and so on. So if the agreement is not implemented, so the benefits of that agreement will lead to stagnation in growth figures of the society. Now, you asked about democratic reforms. Democratic reforms are very important because it is through democratic governance that political leaderships are kept accountable by their population. And, of course, you can see clearly less accountable political leaders will be less keen on doing the right kind of reforms. So you need to get through democratic reforms real buy-in of your citizenry into building Moldova's statehood, into building Moldova's reforms. And of course, if that doesn't happen, that buy-in won't be there. There will be disillusionment, which which will not be good for the country in the long run. So I would say that these are the stagnation points, because it's a reform framework. Its implementation means reforms. The association agreement is there to help give a roadmap for reforms. If that implementation stagnates, then the reforms of the country stagnate and the lives of people stagnate. And I think that is the biggest problem.
Have you warned the ruling parties about the potential danger in case they are not going to implement the association agreement, or in case of miming the reforms that they were committed to implement?
This is an issue of which I've spoken both publicly and privately with many people. We're not here to judge, we're here to help. The European Union is here to support. It is in our interest, our fundamental interest is a stable Moldova which grows, which brings benefit through higher standards of living, through more, which is a contributor to European security, both through sort of internal stability, through dealing with the Transnistrian conflict, through a number of issues. And yes, I have said that that there is an internal danger, if you want to use that word, in not making reforms. I've said it publicly, I've said it privately. I noticed that you used the word ruling parties, and I think that this is one thing where I would like to see a change, because the concept of ruling is something from above. The concept of governing parties, which we would hope to see modern political parties being, and modern coalitions being, is more about accountability to the population. So I do hope also that we would at some stage move from thinking of parties in government as ruling parties, but more as governing accountable political forces.
You have been talking almost decisive about the need of concrete steps in depoliticizing and independence of prosecution. In your opinion, how serious is the current situation in this field, and why is not wanted a clear reform of the institution?
As I cannot get into the heads of other people, so I wouldn't be able to really analyze why a clear reform is not wanted, or even if it's not wanted. But there are two elements here. One is that there is very little trust towards the prosecution system and towards the judicial system within the population of this country. I think it's very important to work on that trust. And that trust is best guaranteed by professionalism, independence, and depolitization. I'm very happy that the draft law on the prosecution services is at this moment with the Venice Commission. Within this month, within the month of March, we should have an opinion by the Venice Commission. And I do hear commitments, and I do hope that those commitments will lead to clear steps that the new parliament would take after the Venice Commission opinion, adopting the law with the recommendations of the Venice Commission taken on board as a matter of priority. This is also one of the key benchmarks of our justice sector budget support. So we do see that there is a lack of trust, and we see that there is structurally, partly as an inheritance still from the Soviet period, a framework which does not necessarily guarantee the functioning of the prosecutor's office in an independent, modern European manner. Now, trust could be there even within an older legal framework, which is imperfect. So the trust issue is one. A new legal framework will help fix structural issues, put them in place. But that doesn't mean that through implementation and through goodwill, political will, this new sort of independent prosecutor's service will really be independent, and that those reforms will take place. So you need to both put reforms in place in terms of legislation, but you also need to implement them.
From your empowerment as leader of the EU delegation in Moldova, and to this day you have always analyzed the seriousness of implementing the most important key reforms in our country, especially those of justice and combating corruption. In this context, are you satisfied with the management's will of the Superior Court of Magistrates, National Integrity Commission, National Anti-Corruption Center, and General Prosecutor about reforming the institution they lead?
I will be honest in that I do see some will in discussions. And we have seen some cases in the past year where judges, for instance, suspected of corruption, have been put in front of courts. Is this systemic? Is it going sort of deep enough? Probably not. So I would say that there is space for more political will, there is space for more action, and there is space for more determination to do this. We did, for instance, in the last review of the justice sector budget support, when we paid the last variable tranche, we made some cuts. We made those cuts for two reasons, the one you already asked about me earlier, the prosecutor's office, and the slowness of the fight against corruption. So I think it's quite clear that we are not maybe that satisfied. But the fundamental question is not even, are we satisfied? The Moldovan political system is helped, supported in reforms when they take place by the European Union. But the fundamental question is the population of the country satisfied? Because that is the fundamental judge in a country.
Well, what kind of sanctions risk more than that Moldova if the justice reform, especially the prosecution reform, will stagnate beyond the sanctions that you mentioned already?
Well, I'd say that when we will look at the next budget support payments, of course we will look at what has been done. Do we need to cut further? Can we pay more? Would we, for instance, need to completely cancel a tranche? All these possibilities are on the table. Now, this can be seen maybe as a sanction, or it can just simply be seen that the development contract, which is in that in our assistance, is just simply not fulfilled. But if I look at the biggest sanction, I would get back to the question which we already talked about. What happens to the country's own growth, economic possibilities, others, if reforms don't take place? And here, the biggest sanction any country failing to reform will face is the fact that many opportunities of growth, of investment, of new possibilities, of confidence in society, these opportunities will be missed. And that, I think, in the rules of modern democratic politics, is the biggest sanction you can deal with.
What are the chances, in your opinion, that the state officials, judges, prosecutors, and corrupt public servants to go to jail, maybe this year, maybe in the next 2 years, while today they are being protected by their colleagues? You see what happens in the justice sector, or they are protected by the politicians in power?
In a way, by asking the question in that way, you're answering it in your own way, at least to yourself. Now, I can only talk about the need for more political will. Now, there is corruption everywhere. That is true. In all countries there is corruption, but I think that the measure of the maturity of a system, the level of democracy of a system, the measure of rule of law, is what happens when corruption is found. Will there be an investigation? Will there be a prosecution? Will that prosecution be non-political? Because, for instance, a situation where those out of political favor or those in opposition would get prosecuted, but those who are members of governing parties don't, because of protection mechanisms, that is not effective fight against corruption. That could be revanchist. And for this reason, I would say that transition takes time, I'll admit that. And we've seen in countries in the European Union, in transition countries in the European Union, for instance, all countries coming closer to the European Union, the Balkans have some experience of that, that opening corruption cases and dealing with high-level corruption, it took a long time to get there, but then it started happening. And there's that moment of political will, which comes from, I'd say, two directions. One is a realization of how much it costs for a country not to do those reforms. What are the opportunity costs? We talked about that already. And then comes the question, how much, I'd say, a country is, I'd say in a positive way, in awe of her own population, of her own citizens, and feels a need to be accountable. And here, I think it's a question of, does the social contract get reformatted through that transition?
What do you think, when in Republic of Moldova we will have a justice like in Romania, for example?
I don't have a crystal ball. And I would do comparisons also more broadly than just across the Prut with European countries. But it is a question of political will. We have now reached a fundamentally important moment with the signing and ratification of the association agreement. So it's becoming more and more clear what are the losses of not taking the right decisions. What are the losses for the country's statehood, for the functioning of the state? Nobody wants to end up in a failed state, I'd say. And when those dynamics coming from the population and from within people who enter politics and enter government and really see that I'm committed to my country, my sovereign independent country, rather than just vested interests, that grows within a consolidation of statehood, a consolidation of reforms. I cannot give you a date. I mean, I'm not a psychic, so I can't give you a date on that. But I hope that time, that corruption cases will be dealt with the rule of law in a transparent manner, is rather sooner rather than later, and that these cases will not be dealt with in terms of imitation, but will be dealt with in terms of real reforms.
Mr. Ambassador, what leverage has EU to control the efficiency of European taxpayers' money allocated in the justice sector of Moldova?
Well, looking and analyzing to which extent the policy matrices which are under that sort of budget support, for instance, are being fulfilled, and taking our payment decisions based on that, it is a question of how strict a conditionality do we take for our reforms. So, I mean, I think that that is the main mechanism. Another thing, and this is something which one needs to look at very carefully, is macroeconomic stability of a country. Because if you look at, for instance, budgetary support, there are two conditions. One is the condition of really those policy metrics is being fulfilled. And it is important to be very rigorous in looking at the conditionality. But also, is the budgetary process, is the spending process, the revenue and expenditure side of the function of the state controlled by the Ministry of Finance, is that transparent enough in a way where you know that the funds which are paid as a result of budget support go normally to the budgetary process. And by looking at these aspects, these two aspects, we should have enough of tools to ensure that we are accountable in front of European taxpayers. And this is a very important point, because I talk a lot about accountability. You heard that word. I remember each time when I'm doing preparing together with headquarters a disbursement decision. I remember where that money comes from. That money comes from single mothers with low incomes who pay their taxes. It comes from ordinary people. It's not manna from heaven. This is money which our citizens are willing to pay in order to help another country, in order to promote the EU's interest of a stable, prosperous, secure neighborhood. And I need to ask myself, are my actions in that chain which looks at those funds, are these actions really aimed at giving people at ensuring that what the European taxpayer is voluntarily, through democratic processes, willing to spend helping other countries, that money gets that money is used in a responsible manner. And this is the accountability issue, which I need to think of every day.
Why Moldovan law enforcement are not taking action on the basis of journalistic investigations of independent media institutions and doesn't cooperate with them as democratic countries do, in your opinion?
I think you would probably have to ask the law enforcement services, but I know that there is a certain amount, I think in every society, of mistrust between the media, from one side, and the law enforcement agencies. Now, in a way, media reporting should provide a basis, at least to start an investigation. It is clear that a criminal investigation is not a matter of, let's say, something you put very much out in the public. It's also very much based on the value of a presumption of innocence. So very often when you do a criminal investigation, you don't go to very many details discussing the case or talking about the suspect and so on, because what if he's innocent? But of course, that kind of a situation where the media, doing its watchdog duty to society, takes up concerns, and these concerns are ignored, there is no investigations and so on. And investigations can either lead to prosecution, or they can lead to dismissing the case due to lack of due to a lack of evidence. So that there I think it's a question also of the social contract. Now, one thing which, in a consolidating democracy, if you look at, and I know this is almost a quarter of a century ago, but some things develop very slowly. If you look at the role of the media in the Soviet-dominated or communist world and so on, it was the role of the media was then basically to reinforce what the state or the party or somebody said. The role of independent media is something which took a long time to take root. And then comes another thing which is very, very important. And I have no reason to criticize the media, but just to put a thing which is very important, is the responsibility of the media. So, which is dealt in many European member states, EU member states, others, through media ethics councils, also, by the way, with media participation very strongly in them, through certain libel legislation, other things, where already from the beginning there is a very strong feeling of trust between the law enforcement agencies and the media in knowing that for the media to start talking about a case, the evidence needs to be so strong that you don't go into a question that, is the media just criticizing this person out of political or opinion grounds, but where that information really starts getting that trust. This is a question which I've seen in many transition societies.
How important is the role of non-political media then, meaning independent media, in exposing corrupt acts, especially now when Moldova has to implement the agreement?
Crucial. But I would put it also a bit more broadly in that sometimes the understanding, especially in the years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, of independent media was very strongly on the watchdog role, but also on that you needed to attack and you needed to sort of look at, find problems. That is part of the role. That's a very important role. But that needs to be woven by a journalistic sort of aim, and I'm a son of a journalist, or my father was a journalist, and the discussion I grew up with, he later on went to another kind of a career. But you have to be, the journalistic ethics is about giving objective information, not in a way giving that much of a narrative, than really objective information for the population and for the public to make their own goals, make their own sort of conclusions, draw their own conclusions from certain situations. For media to be really independent and trusted, for instance, one of the things which we have been pushing for very strongly is that Moldova should really adopt a law on the transparency of media ownership. And this has been an issue which has been hanging out there for a long time. Because when that ownership is transparent, and when it becomes clear that the media as such is there to inform, not either to praise or do propaganda for, or to prosecute, but to inform, then the media is really playing its full role. And when the ownership is clear, then editorial policy becomes more independent as well, because the role of the because then the owners look at media as a business, as a with a product and consumers, the public. And what a mature society wants is objective information for the society to draw its own opinions. So I'd say that the role of the media, of the free media, in a democratizing society, and I would put it as something much more broad than the association agreement, is crucial, because it's one of the fundamental backbones of a modern society. It serves the people's right to get objective information through professional journalism. And here, exposing corruption is one role, but giving information on what's happening with political life, giving information, not sort of pushing the viewer to think politically in that way or the other. Of course, everybody has their views, and that will always be part of editorial policy to a certain extent, is going to be a crucial issue.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for the interview, domnilor și domnilor. Atât pentru astăzi, ne revedem la ora expertizei luni, la ora 19:50. Un weekend frumos aveți. Toate bune!